Welcome to Season 5 of the Founders Only podcast, where we uncover the pivotal trials and triumphs in the stories of great founders, delivering actionable advice on how to be the leader of the pack. I am so excited to welcome Brian Massey as my guest today. Brian is the founder of Conversion Sciences and the author of the book, Your Customer Creation Equation. Since 2007, Brian has worked with hundreds of companies to improve their online presence. He's a sought-after speaker, presenting at IBM, Inbound, LeadsCon, Content Marketing World, Affiliate Summit, and others. He has written for online publications, including ClickZ, Search Engine Land, and Marketing Land. Massey is also the host of the Intended Consequences podcast. Again, welcome, Brian. So we're going to jump right in and start with, can you share your journey to becoming the founder of Convergent Sciences?
Well, so I came out of college with a bachelor's in computer science. But I was one of those programmers that had some social skills, so I couldn't imagine myself really sitting in a cubicle. I wanted to do something more. So I ended up going into semiconductor sales for Texas Instruments. I was working out in California for a few years after that. I rose to my highest level of incompetence in that and decided to come back to Austin and get back into programming. It felt more natural for me. And apparently I was so good at programming that they promoted me to their director of marketing. So it was a small company. The founder or the director of engineering and me left that company to found our own business in the 90s doing web development. The dot-com buzz took out some of our clients, which we just didn't have the gumption to keep going. And then through the early 2000s, I spent my time building websites for B2B technology companies primarily. And my ability to be an employee is somewhat limited by my personality. So those were relatively short engagements, but I learned a lot and built some very effective websites. I'm good at building things. I'm not good at sitting there and putting quarters in the machine. So I saw a presentation by Brian and Jeffrey Eisenberg called The Wizards of the Web. That introduced me to conversion optimization. And I mean, with that background, computer programmer, salesperson, entrepreneur, marketing person, there really wasn't anything else I could do but become a conversion scientist. So in 2007, I started.
And so in 2007, conversion optimization wasn't really a well-known thing. Yeah? Yeah. So how did you frame it back then, out of curiosity, to clients or prospects? What did you say? What was the value proposition?
Well, the main thing was that I realized how smart this was, to use data to make decisions in the designs that you're doing on the website. Back then, we didn't have the tools that we have today. So I spent most of my time building personas, facilitating those meetings. And then from those personas, I would map out, here are the things you need on your website. And then I would turn those over to either their web development team or a partner company that I worked with to do the actual implementation of those things. But during that whole time, I was railing against the old way of marketing and boring corporate speak and you know, all of these things, and it was quite enjoyable. I love to be a contrarian.
Are you from Austin originally?
I grew up in Arlington, which is near
Texas.
Fort Worth.
Got it. So before you became an entrepreneur, who was Brian?
Who was Brian? So the first of 4 boys, so I'm the elder. I was definitely a nerd. It was Dungeons and Dragons and science fiction, and I even played violin in middle school and high school. But I was doing things like when I was in middle school, I made a robot with a mechanical arm out of a shoebox, an empty can of tuna, a paper towel roll and the parts from a cassette recorder. I wrote my first video game in middle school in assembly language. You programmers will know of it, but probably haven't programmed in it, which was a knockoff of the Gravatar arcade game. So I was pretty nerdy and pretty curious as a kid, and I think a certain amount of nerdiness helps, but definitely curiosity and how things work and can you make things work.
What about your parents? What did they do for a living?
My dad owned his own business. He was in the business of drafting forms for hospitals and then supplying those. As technology progressed, you can imagine that paper forms became a thing of the past, although it's strange that when we go to the emergency room, we still have to do things on a clipboard. But I'm sure there's a really good reason for that. My mom was a nurse, so she worked in the nursery. She worked for a gynecologist assisting with surgeries.
One of the things I always like to explore on this show is, how people become entrepreneurs. Some people become entrepreneurs by complete accident. They, come into a situation where a solution needs to be created for a problem, and they happen upon this idea, and then they kind of create it, and now they're an entrepreneur. Others are born into it, or they're heavily influenced, usually by a parent watching their parent be an entrepreneur. And so it sounds like you've kind of self-identified as not being a good employee because you're a natural born entrepreneur. And I assume that watching your father be an entrepreneur maybe further enhance that bug. So my question for you is, who did you want to be when you grew up? Like when you were in this younger stage, so you said you went to college for computer science. How did you land at that? And or did you know, even maybe subconsciously, that you wanted to create?
Yeah. I mean, at a young age, things were easy for me. But one thing I noticed is that when I was asked to do something, I didn't get a lot of energy around it. So I basically did the bare minimum to make A's and B's through high school and college. But I noticed that when I did get interested in something, if I'm going to build a robot or if I'm going to write a program in assembly language, that when I'm interested in something, I have this amazing ability to focus. So I think we become entrepreneurs for two broad reasons. There's a part of it that is desire, and then there's a part of it that is fear. And I think both of those are working for me. The desire to run my own company meant I could pick what I was working on, which is not true. But I had a little bit more control over what I was working on. And also this terror that I'm never going to be able to work for another person. I mean, unless we're out there changing something in the world. I think the other thing that is really helpful is that I have this data orientation and I apply it to myself as well. So I got my Myers-Briggs and my Strength Finder and my Sun Sign and my Enneagram, and begin to see all of these things pointing in certain directions. And the value for me was, number one, just as when you're testing a website, you want to find multiple sources of evidence that point to a conclusion that you can then test. I began to see themes in what these tests were telling me. Emotional intelligence quotients, IQ tests, everything. And it kind of gave me the permission to kind of step into who I was. And entrepreneurially, the most important thing for me has always been finding the partner that complements that. So the things that make me a bad employee are also going to make me bad in my business. Having someone who's better at operations, better at details, more interested in working with people that need guidance or that sort of thing. I like to work with, I didn't treat everybody as a peer. So that's been very helpful. And when I'm mentoring entrepreneurs, that's my number one piece of evidence is or my advice is find that complementary person. Otherwise, it's going to be a long, hard slog. And coincidentally, my partner Joel, who works with me in conversion sciences, I met him. He had hired me for his businesses before, and then we decided to work together in 2011. And funny enough, that's when we started making all kinds of money.
It's so interesting when before you find your other, if at the point where you really can't do anything but scale or fail, that's when you really realize that you don't get to pick what you do every day. That you're going to learn every aspect of business. You're going to learn about accounting. You're going to learn about, how to read a profit and loss. You're going to learn about marketing. You're going to learn about founder-led sales. You're going to learn about all these things, or you're going to fail. That's it. Unless you find another who can integrate those things in, because I know in my personal experience, those functional areas that I shied away from because I didn't want to do it, because it was uncomfortable for me, I got burned time and time again by people I'm hiring as experts, so to speak, to do those things. But if you don't have the ability to do at least amateurly every function of your business, you really are wide open for those types of problems. And I love that Jeff Bezos took this approach to building Amazon as well, that he did try to do every job in the business, and for the best of the first 20 years of Amazon was answering the phone 2 weeks out of the year. And so
you have to know enough about something to manage it, that's for sure. And then there is a little bit of luck. I was lucky in that the thing that I enjoyed doing, which was railing against the world and writing and speaking, were areas that I had great energy. That became the platform that when the conversion optimization industry finally emerged, we already had this amazing body of content that helped our search engines, had already built trust. Lots of people had seen me live, and so it has always made it very easy for us to get to
I definitely want to come back to the speaking live and explore a little bit about how you got into that, because I think a lot of our listeners, especially in the B2B space, may be feeling that complete shift in how buyers are buying right now online, and the creativity and maybe the complete rethinking of their own promotional or marketing strategies for their business, and maybe understanding that one-to-one speaking, podcasts, anything that establishes you specifically as a thought leader, or and Joel as the thought leaders in the business, how that can help to kind of navigate these different the changes in the buyer's journey, if you will. So I want to come back to that. But what's your superpower?
My superpower is my tagline for the villainous side of me is that I like to milk sacred cows and make pungent cheese. So I'm a contrarian. I'm looking for how things are being done blindly and how I can upset those apple carts. And that really is one of my favorite parts of experimentation. As you look at what people are doing, they say, well, it's not working. And you say, well, we should change it. It's like, but it's always worked for us. So let's design an experiment that will demonstrate that something else is better. I love those moments of like, wow, that worked. So I don't know if that qualifies as a superpower. Probably the thing that motivates me is that I have a teaching bent. And so we had to create this market. So we're always teaching people about all the parts of it. It's something that I can build energy around. So I think in another life, I might have been a teacher. I shouldn't say just a teacher. The reason I'm not a teacher is because it's so much work.
So now I want to explore that, but I'm going to move on the teacher front. So let's go back to the live speaking. So how did you happen upon, or how did you initially expand that? how did you go from your first 2 or 3, I assume, unpaid speaking engagements to speaking for a fee, and being a sought after speaker, one that is personally invited? It's a
Yeah,
difficult.
yeah. You could almost say that I started the business to do that. I saw that I could make money, but that I could make money from it. But I really wanted to write and speak. That's where I got my energy. So I committed myself at the beginning of 2007 that I would speak in one place every month. So speak someplace, be on somebody's webinar. Podcasting was just emerging at that point. And I was able to do that. Now I had to throw my own lunch and invite people that I knew in Austin to that. I had to throw my own events, 2 other events that I did for those months, but I was able to insinuate my way into some shows and some webinars and things like that, so that I was able to do that every month. And you just have to be willing to say, I want to speak there. I'll fly there. I'll put myself in a hotel. It wasn't until quite a bit later that I would begin to get paid for that and have my travel expenses covered. And even today, if it's a good audience, I'll pay the fee. I'll pay the fare. Access to audiences is what it's all about. So
how do you think you approached finding those opportunities? So nowadays, if you're looking to expand your speaking opportunities as a founder, I think the first step is going to be, and please correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, but I would think after you've kind of got your basic asset, we'll call it your media kit together, where like, what can I talk about? Who am I? What's my, areas of excellence, what have you? Then you've got to find the gigs, and you got to find them before they've already filled up and before, they've already sold all the tickets. And so a lot of times you find nowadays that those events are, a lot of times the promotional calendar for those events doesn't really ramp up until the last, I don't know, 6 weeks or so, something like that. So how would you suggest that our listeners or founders specifically start finding opportunities in that early stage before, like, how did you go about doing that?
Yeah. So, early on it was, whenever I got an ad for, like an email saying, hey, this conference is starting, I would try to find, I would first go and see if they have a submissions link on the page. I would try to find somebody at the company that could direct me to who's making those decisions. And I would say, are you looking for speakers? If they say it's too late next year, I think you have to have that long-term view. So that gets added to a list, and then you can revisit that. Sometimes you'll find that people don't have time, but if they've seen you or heard about you through your blogging, they'll be like, hey, we've got a cancellation. So sometimes you get lucky. Now you can very easily find a list of shows that you want to apply to. Professional speakers. So if you want to be a keynote speaker, so if you want the speaking to be a part of your revenue, which has never been that big a part of, it's not been that important to me. Professional speakers have a process, and they know how to get in front of people and do pitches and stuff like that. And that is, I've done some formal training in how to be a good speaker. I'd recommend Heroic Public Speaking. That community and that group has a ton of programs and information on how you go about building a speaking business. As an entrepreneur, you may not be, I was not that interested in $15,000 keynotes, although I've done a couple, not quite that much. And but those are the tools that you use to expand your audience and become
what was the name?
More recognized.
You said Heroic Public Speaking. That is like a group?
Yeah, it's run by Michael Port, who wrote Steal the Show, which is a very helpful book. And I went there. They run a grad program, and I went there for 4 weekends over the course in 2016 when I got rated below average on a presentation, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm just mailing this in. So I decided I needed to do something to turn it up. And I came out of there with a fantastic stump speech, kind of like the core of what I would be speaking at.
Oh, I love places. That. Thank you. So your book, Your Customer Creation Equation, dives into converting website visitors into customers. Can you share your favorite principle or tip from it?
Well, I think the most important thing I wanted to do with the book was, web design still is not much far removed from the printing of brochures. Let's put a bunch of pages together that talk about us, and then the customer will come and buy our thing. And that is just the wrong metaphor. We still call them web pages. All of these metaphors from brochure printing are still a part of it. So I was like, why don't you look at your website in a different way? So I wanted people to start looking at their websites as contributions to the business. So is this a lead generation site? Is this an e-commerce site? And you're going to build these things in a very different way. And so I talked about, I published the book in 2012. So, the fallacy of the funnel and how you should, there are certain situations where if you've got a sales support site that sales is handling the business and they just need to be able to point to a site, okay, a brochure site works. But otherwise, you're either a publisher, you're e-commerce, you're generating leads, and you really should focus on those things. And the websites change. If you see your website as a lead generation website, then you talk about that step primarily, and then any information on your product or offering becomes support for that, provides the reasons. So I wanted that shift in the way of looking at the web from that book. And I shared the things that had been helpful for me, things that I'd learned in the Eisenberg Brothers' Waiting for Your Cat to Bark, which was a seminal book for me. Things from Steve Krug, Don't Make Me Think. It was kind of a synthesis of what had been talked about in different areas, and I wanted to bring it together.
So the key premise was just really looking at your website, web properties, web assets, digital assets from the customer first perspective. What is it that you want the customer to do? And
yes, no, I think it's business first, but what is your website going to do to help you start a relationship with that customer? They can read a bunch of stuff and be like, oh, these guys are good, and move on. If you can offer them something more in exchange for a name and email address, then you're building a business asset, your mailing list. That is something that has real value that Google can't take away from you with an algorithm change, that your competitors can't take away by outbidding you on AdWords. So that's really important. And the e-commerce businesses that we work with, they're not successful until they figured out email, old-fashioned email.
Yes.
SMS is coming on pretty strong. So really, seeing it as this is a website whose job is to build a relationship with people, and if they're not interested in my products, then we don't want them around. So, build the list, start a conversation with the salesperson, get them to buy the product. That's why we put up websites.
It's a sale. That's right. So my first time hearing about you was when you taught me in your course on CXL. So okay. I know in the course that I took there, the mini degree for CRO, there was a lot of talk about businesses being ready to start CRO. So what are the key indicators? I'd like to hear from you. What are the key indicators that a company is ready to focus on conversion optimization or bring it into their strategy, actually have a CRO strategy and implement it?
So there are stages. I actually think that when you put a website up and you say, I would like to sell some things through the web, you're doing conversion optimization because conversions is what you want. You want to turn that traffic into sweet prospects and customers. So that is optimization based on what you think. like really small sample size, you and your team building this website. The only thing that we want to do as experimenters is increase the sample sizes and increase the quality of those sample sizes. So we can bring in a focus group and have 10 or 12 people look at our website and tell us what they think of it. But those people are not actually in the process of buying, so it's lower quality. We can look at our analytics, which is collecting the behaviors of all these people that are coming to our websites. And this becomes an amazing source of relevant, qualified people. Then we can design experiments where we're doing A/B testing on those people that are coming and trying different things. So the first thing you need is a good product. The second thing you need is the words that tell people what your product does and explain to them very clearly why it's a benefit for them, why they should choose it. Manage their objections as much as possible. If it's a sales close, then your website's job is not to convince them, but to get them on the sales call. And then the next level is, do you have a large enough audience that you can start doing some of these A/B testing experiments? In the meantime, we've got heat map reports that let us see how people are interacting with pages, so we can begin to see pages where people aren't scrolling very far. We can actually go out and, instead of 10 or 12 people in a focus group, we can have a focus group of 50 or 100 people. So the larger sample sizes compensates for the fact that they're not actually on our site looking for our problem. And for those of us that are doing consumer goods, I mean, if we're going to a focus group where they've purchased shoes or bought air filters, they can easily imagine themselves in that situation. So the data is pretty good. The limiting factor is, A/B testing is the best data we can get. It is more sophisticated, a little bit more difficult to do, and it's easy to make mistakes. But as your number of conversions grow, your ability to get good data from each of these levels of optimization is.
So what about the size of the business or the size of the traffic? Is there, for your potential clients and prospects for Conversion Sciences, where do you kind of draw the line to say, well, you're not quite ready to work with a CRO agency? You should instead maybe begin to do some internal testing using these types of tools until you hit this threshold. Then you're kind of primed. What is that threshold in your opinion?
Yeah, so we'll do an audit for just about anyone, but we won't if they don't have the resources to actually act on our recommendations. So almost any site, we can do a heuristic. We've got our own experience, our own playbooks. They will have some data. Almost even the smallest sites have Google Analytics. We can put the heat mapping software on there and see how things are interacting that way. So we can do an audit analysis if they're going to get a bunch of recommendations and then not have the team to actually go in and start executing on those things. It's very unsatisfying. So I think that's the number one thing, is that you've got some space in your marketing and your development team to add this experimentation and trial and error level to it. Beyond that, for A/B testing, we're looking for, if we want to test an idea, we need a minimum of 100 conversions per variation. So we've got a control and then we've got an idea that we're testing. So a minimum of 200 conversions. That can be e-commerce sale, that can be a lead generation. But realistically, as we begin to narrow in and test on different traffic sources and things like that, something in the range of 500 conversions a month is going to give you a pretty good testing velocity to really knock out one good idea and get an idea of how it's working on a variety of different kinds of visitors.
Makes sense. What resource, well, let me frame my question. So I've heard you say before that you use the terms behavioral science and conversion optimization interchangeably. So can you tell me a little bit about that, and tell me what resource or course has been most influential for you to learn behavioral science and how to integrate that? Like, do you have a framework or a model that you go to in the process of analyzing behaviors, user behavior?
So I can't actually tell you that I've ever gone out and studied behavioral science in like taken a course on it or anything like that. But I want to kind of take a spin off of those words, behavioral science, because they're kind of scary. We're already wired for this. Every time that you do a post on Instagram and then you go back and you check how many likes and shares and comments you got, you're looking at how other people are behaving around your content. And it's going to influence the sorts of things that you do in the future, whether you're running a business or not. When you select a book from the New York Times bestseller list and understand what to read next, when you use the Rotten Tomatoes freshness score to figure out what you're going to watch next, you're using other people's behaviors to influence that. And when you buy something based on the star rating, the number of reviews, the spread from 5 all the way down to 1 star, that is exactly what A/B testing is. We're looking at the results of other people's behaviors to try to understand what the distribution is. I mean, we all know that if it's a 5-star product, but it only has 5 reviews, the sample size is too small.
Yes.
Now, we don't think that, but we know that. So we're all really behavioral scientists. I've just had to formalize that. And the process that we use is the same one that Newton and Galileo and Einstein all used. It's called the scientific method. It provides a certain amount of rigor, but its primary job is to get our biases, our superstitions, our stereotypes out of the mix. We don't want to be building websites based on what we think is best. We want to build them based on what other people think are best. And it's really hard to get outside of what I call 3 pounds of seething biases that sit between our ears. So the scientific method is, I think if you boil down anybody's process, ultimately they would be some form of that.
Yes.
You just don't want to skip any steps.
Yes.
Otherwise it gets sloppy.
How does a company know if they've achieved product market fit? And how does your agency vet customers from this perspective in the discovery process? Because you said earlier you have to have a good product, which I completely agree. So tell me a little bit what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So when I hear product market fit, what I hear is we have a product that meets a need, and we know the words that will tell people, that convince people that it is going to solve their problems. And words is a very broad category. It includes your brand and your value proposition and your messages and the images that go along with that in whatever medium you're advertising in. I teach a course at Founders Institute and Tech Ranch and Capital Factory, in which I talk about the MVNP, the maximum viable non-product. And my premise is, let's take these tools that we use to optimize a website, and we'll put up a false website. I think they call it a painted door in some circles. But this is before you build the MVNP. And your goal is to find some sources of traffic. It could be through search. It can be through mailing lists that you may have gathered. You can experiment on these things with a Kickstarter or something like that. So there's a number of places that you can go, but put up a page or put up a site, make your case, bring some traffic to it, and find out, does it work? And as you build an audience, like if you say, buy this product, and they click to buy, and you say, oh, it's not available, but we'll let you know, or you can ask for feedback, you begin to understand, is it the product that's not presented right? Is it the words that you're using, your value proposition that's the problem? And if you can find that ahead of time before you've spent any money on anything, what a great thing to take to investors. What a great thing to take to your spouse, who is like, are you sure this is going to make money? And if you can't, get out of there and go back to the drawing board. So I think that's the best example of how we use our tools, analytics and the heat map reports and customer research, these focus groups. There's all sorts of resources that are much cheaper than building an MVP and seeing if it flies. Because you may have a great MVP or MVP, minimum viable product, or even a great product, but you haven't found the words, you haven't found the positioning, you haven't found that brand voice that's going to make people go, oh. So that's how I feel about that.
I love that answer. So So what would you, how do you are you saying that the MVMP is similar to pre-selling?
Yes, you can position it as pre-selling. So, you want to take them as far through the purchase process as possible. So if you're selling something physical and they're going to buy online within a credit card, you want to go right up to taking their credit card. Arguably, you could take their credit card and say, "Oh, we can't do that," and that would really tell you, if your message is going to get them all the way through the process. That's a little bit fraught. But so typically on the thank you pages or the receipt pages, we will say like, "Oh, this is not yet available. Join the wait list." And that actually starts to build a list of people who are interested in your product, so that if you do have good luck, when you do launch the product, you've got your first buyers potentially on a list. And you can continue to market to them and sell to them, to educate them, so that when they're ready to buy,
take that same concept of the pre-selling, once you have the MVP, to sell that first MVP, to actually take the credit card information, to you're going to be the beta testers, the early adopters. We're going to give you at a lower price. You have an opportunity to test pricing and things like that with that group, and completely prepare your whole go-to-market strategy and assets and everything, messaging, and then leverage that to actually build the next iteration of the product. So I really love that. So let me, one more question. You mentioned heat maps. So what's your favorite? Because there's so many tools to use. What are your favorite two tools, one of them being a heat map tool, but what are your favorite two tools in your toolbox for CRO?
So interestingly enough, Microsoft has an excellent heat mapping and session recording tool called Clarity. Very fully featured, and I don't even think they'll sell it to you at any level at this point. Hotjar is also a good entrant into that. They are, what happens is these tools tend to get successful and they go enterprise. So 12-month contracts, more expensive, same set, but enterprises, they can't buy cheap things. They have to buy expensive things. There is this amazing cosmic power that you get from an A/B testing tool. So if you think of it as a way that marketing can change the website without hiring a developer, without getting IT's cycles involved, it really does allow you to change a lot of things. Now, some things that you change will require a front-end developer to write the JavaScript, but the A/B testing tool changes your website in the visitor's browser. So if you want to change a headline, if you want your mobile visitors to see a different headline from your desktop visitors, the marketer can go in and change that and see what happens. And if you've got enough traffic, then you can design an A/B test using these tools. But in terms of personalization, in terms of trying things before you ask IT to invest in doing them, they're absolutely incredible. And all of them have a WYSIWYG editor, so you can actually go in without knowing how to code and make some pretty good changes to the site. A lot of our tests, we do some sophisticated stuff, so we need a coder to go in and write that. But it's what
do you recommend as the best tool? So if you're not doing something more complex and you want to use one of the tools in the market to A/B test, what is your favorite?
Right. So we did an analysis recently. Google's free testing tool went away, unfortunately. Nice. It was a great place for anybody to kind of plug in. But so we did analysis. We came to the conclusion that convert.com, Convert Experiments, provided all the things that we needed. Now we were looking at some of the more sophisticated attributes, and it did not have a very good WYSIWYG editor, but they've improved it. So convert.com, a lot of our clients bring their own things. So we have people on VWO, Visual Website Optimizer. They have a lot of those heat map reporting capabilities as well. And I recently just did a webinar with them. our clients are in the mid market, so we're looking for affordability is important. The market leader is Optimizely, but it's enterprise priced.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's probably those converting.com is would be a great place to start. And I know Dennis, I've been on his board of advisors, so I think I know he's diligent and
And taking
conscientious.
into consideration customer feedback, I assume, to improve the product. Yeah. So now to my favorite question that I'm going to ask you. How do you integrate Jungian psychology into your marketing strategies to understand and influence consumer behavior?
I'm curious how you knew that I was into Jungian psychology.
Yes.
Would I?
We are not that. We are not spies. Yes, you told us.
I'm starting to wonder. So for me, when you're looking at value propositions and things like that, so for all of my data stuff, that value proposition and that messaging platform is a ceiling. If we haven't figured that out, then we can change we can change the order of the stuff, we can change buttons, we can change calls to action, we can optimize forms. It's all going to hit a ceiling very, very soon. So great copy, even in the business to business world, is going to have a story arc. And Jung talked about there are certain stories that are human. He calls it the collective unconscious. And so people from different cultures, from different times in history, all come up with these same set of symbols. The hero archetype, the warrior archetype, the goddess archetype. And so you can, if you tap into these things, there is a certain recognition that comes up. So it can be really powerful in developing messages and stuff like that. I did a presentation a few times. The great thing about presenting is you get to float ideas. And my premise was, if you want to make your customer the hero, then you have to play the villain. And so I went through all of the villainous things, and it includes there's in the world of psychology, you're talking about behavioral science, there's this line between persuading and manipulating. You say, okay, I'm going to create scarcity by putting a time limit on this offer, even though there is no time limit. That is manipulative to me. If you're actually going to make the product, the offer limited time, then, you're above the line, I would say. So there's all these villainous things that a brand can do. There's all these very successful brands that are hard to get. Google's a great example of that. Like, they've had all the success, but if you ever try to talk to somebody at Google, unless you're spending $1 million a month with them, good luck. And it's villainous. The Jungian archetypes really do influence my storytelling, message development, and I love tapping into something primal.
Is that difficult to do in B2B?
It is not, but it is not difficult to do in B2B. It is difficult to get past the gatekeepers in B2B. So, I do B2B marketing for my business, and I have my own gatekeepers in my head that are like, oh, that's so colorful and so full of metaphor and so delicious, and this is too risky. But that's my favorite thing about experimenting, is that, on Friday, as your brain starts to loosen up, the week's coming to an end, you start to get a little more creative, you have this idea, oh, if we talked about it like this, it could change everything, and you're obsessing about it all weekend, and you've got these plans, and you've already started to create headlines in your head, and then Monday hits, and you're like, I could never sell that. Well, do an experiment and see if, in fact, you're crazy. But you might actually have that effect of like, wow, this is performing much better. And I think none of us got into being entrepreneurs or being marketers to do the same thing month after month. We got into change hearts and minds. I might be projecting a little bit. Create, yes. like we want to change things. We aren't here to. Most of us aren't here to make money and keep things the same.
Definitely.
That's for sure.
If you did give one piece of advice earlier to entrepreneurs, which was find your other. What's one other piece of advice? What's one, and this time I want to hear one that, and perhaps your original advice was also this, but one that is inspired by a lesson, a major lesson you've learned as an entrepreneur. Like, what is that big lesson that you would yell at the mountaintops to all the other entrepreneurs, like, hey, I made this mistake. Do not do this.
Yeah. My advice is be expensive. So when we come out, maybe we're like me, we're a single contributor in the space. It's a nascent space. So I'm like, okay, I just need to, make it cheap enough so that I can, pay these bills. And if I get these customers and I get the price down. I think the way to look at it is, what price would I have to choose? And then what price would I have to come up with, the value proposition, the branding, all of that stuff, and build the value around it that a few customers would allow me to do that, so that I've got more time to work in my business. I've had to do the hard work of figuring out exactly how I need to sell this. And what you find over time is when you finally are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we actually closed that deal and that's that much money. Dial forward another year, you're going to be looking back going like, I can't believe we charged so little. So if you can accelerate that shift in memory, I call it adding zeros. Basically, mentally, you're adding zeros to your value. Money is a tricky thing. People want to hang on to their money, but they also gauge your quality based on how much you ask for. So there's this balance that has to be done. And in the business to business world, which is where I've always been in this business, in both of my businesses, people are spending other people's money. Unless you're selling to entrepreneurs, that would be my third thing, is try not to sell to entrepreneurs. Don't sell to startups. Anyways, they're selling other people's money. So the most important thing for them is this going to impact my job? Is this going to make me look good? And that's all about building value. In the B2B world, money is not as important as you think it is. It's the value that you're building, that they know that they're not going to lose their job. So this is really like when you were talking about the gatekeeper and making the customer or the visitor the hero, you're talking about making the gatekeeper the hero. That is, yes, your champion who might be coming, they may not be making the final decision on the expenditure. Their job is to their job is to become the hero, and to an extent it's going to be the gatekeepers that are the dragon they have to slay. Yes. My next question is, what is one book, podcast, or resource that has profoundly impacted your perspective and mindset as a founder? I've been told this is the most difficult question that I ask. So I'm gonna hopefully be helpful here. I think I've already mentioned two that were seminal for me: "Waiting for Your Cat to Bark" by Brian and Jeffrey Eisenberg, Steve Krug, "Don't Make Me Think." So that will get you set up in terms of how to think about data and behavioral science and customer research, which is at the core of all that we're doing. But it was Brian and Jeffrey Eisenberg presenting at a very unusual business school near Austin here called the Wizard Academy. And for you Harry Potter fans, it way predates that. It's this eccentric ad guy who began building this campus out in the hill country here, Roy Williams. And it is, so the premise of the school is, let's do on purpose what great artists, writers, sculptors, musicians, and composers, what do they do naturally that allows them to tap into our heart, to wake up our minds? How do we do that in our business communications? And I love the premise. Not to mention that this was the start of my career and my business. Okay. Where can people find you on social media? I spend most of my time on LinkedIn.
And that's just, okay, they can just find you by your name.
Yes, of course. You can drop it in show notes.
Yes. And yep, that is it. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope this was super helpful and as helpful as it was to me. And we'll see you next time.